Ever since the premiere, I've had a strong feeling that the opening scene in Twin Peaks The Return is the most important one. Much like the Winky's diner scene in Mulholland Drive, which pretty much sums up the main theme of the entire movie. Or more importantly, like Cooper's dream in the original show. Complete the puzzle, solve the crime. And I think this quote goes for the opening scene of The Return as well. If we can figure out the riddle in this scene, we can figure out what is happening and why. And after episode 15, I think we got most of the pieces of the puzzle. So that is what I'm going to talk about here. I don't know if this has already been said on YouTube, and I don't care. I'm doing my video independently of that. The theories I'm going to present you with are both my own and other theories I read mainly on YouTube comments, on episode recaps, or on forums. And I've piled all this together in my head. So let's start deciphering this scene. And if you're not caught up with Twin Peaks, then you shouldn't be watching this at all. Turn the video off.
Agent Cooper.
The scene takes place in the White Lodge and is a conversation between Cooper and the fireman, who's essentially God. The first thing he says is, "Listen to the sounds." And if you know David Lynch, you know he's all about sound in his movies. He actually does the sound design himself in this season. Now this quote is mostly aimed at us, the audience. It's Lynch telling us to listen to the sounds. Specifically the two main sounds we've been hearing. You have the electric wooden sound of the Black Lodge and the humming at the Great Northern Hotel, which I first thought could have been Josie, but I have since dismissed that idea because it doesn't fit in anywhere into the plot. I now believe that the sound is coming from the White Lodge. But instead of just taking it for granted, I do have some plausible evidence supporting this. And in order to explain it, we are going to talk about Judy. So fuck you, Philip Jeffries. Who is Judy? If you've been familiar with Twin Peaks lore, then you're probably familiar with the name Judy Houseman. Up until this season, we haven't had a clue as to who she is, with the exception of the Josie thing, but like I said, I don't think Josie have anything to do with this season. I firmly believe in the theory that Judy is in fact Major Briggs. Major Briggs is dead, and we still don't know where his head is, but we do, kind of. Cooper saw his head floating in space after Naido launched herself out in space. So he's still alive somewhere. In episode 15 we learned that Judy exists, is essential to the plot, and that Evil Cooper has already met with Judy without his knowledge. And in episode 1 we learned from Ben Horn that Mrs. Houseman is staying at the Great Northern. So if we assume that Judy Houseman is a codename for Major Briggs, then we can assume that he's the one staying at the Great Northern. And since Major Briggs is strongly connected to the White Lodge, then we can also assume that the humming is connected to Major Briggs and the White Lodge. Now, in episode 16, the sound did ring at the hospital when Cooper was waking up, and then the one-armed man contacted Cooper when the room was empty. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the one-armed man is behind this particular sound. It just means that he used the sound to lure away Bushnell in order to have a private conversation with Cooper. The fireman and the White Lodge could easily still be behind this. The next thing the fireman says is, "It is in our house now," after hearing a strange sound in the gramophone. What the actual sound is, I do not know. But what the fireman is referring to is that evil has now entered the White Lodge. And he follows this by saying, "It all cannot be said aloud now." That is because it's no longer a safe place to dwell and spill excessive information. We know so far that the season does not appear in chronological order. So I believe that this scene is happening chronologically after the big showdown in Twin Peaks that is going to happen at the end of the season. It is not happening before we see him in the Black Lodge with Laura and the arm, because his pin is not on his chest when he's talking to the fireman, but it is on his chest in the Black Lodge. And if Cooper has been trapped in the Black Lodge, how could he possibly have been going to the White Lodge to talk to the fireman in the meantime? This has to have happened after all of his Dougie Jones shenanigans. And considering the footage we've seen from the trailers, we know that he will return to this place. At the same time, Evil is using Sarah Palmer as a vessel to gain entry to the White Lodge. And I believe that it's more specifically the experiment from the glass box that is doing it. And Evil Cooper's coordinates are are leading to the White Lodge Gate by Jack Rabbit's palace, where the evil symbol hangs out, the symbol which evil Cooper wants. So it's more than plausible that all of this will happen, and if it does happen accordingly, it makes sense that the fireman is saying it is in our house now and it all cannot be said aloud now. Then Cooper will have to face his own doppelganger in the White Lodge to determine their destiny. The next thing he says is, remember 430. Now 430 could mean lots of things we don't know yet. The closest thing I can connect it to is a comment that I read a few weeks ago, that it's a reference to the atomic bomb and the birth of Evil and Bob. The bombing takes place in White Sands, New Mexico, 1945 at 5:29. Now New Mexico is on the Mountain Standard Time, while Twin Peaks is at the Pacific Time 1 hour later, which would make it 4:29 in Twin Peaks when the atomic bombing took place. And I don't find it hard to believe that the Evil or Bob entered our world 1 minute after the bomb went off. 430 may have another meaning though that we are not presented with yet, but this one is not really that far-fetched in my opinion. Richard and Linda. I believe that these are Evil Cooper's children. Richard is confirmed. We now know that he is indeed the son of Audrey and Evil Cooper. We could already suspect this after Doc Hayward informed us about Cooper leaving Audrey's room after he came out of the Black Lodge. We haven't heard much from Linda though. She was mentioned back in episode 6. We know that she lives at the Fat Trout Trailer Park, and there's a reason why we keep cutting back to that place. Not just because Steven and Becky lives there. Something will happen there, I'm sure. Now, as far as who Linda's mother is goes, we basically have two options. Diane or Annie. Both equally possible in my opinion. Diane was indeed raped by Evil Cooper as well. This rape is very likely to have led to the birth of Linda. This was possibly confirmed in episode 16, but we don't know yet. Or how about Annie? I like this theory a bit more, to be honest. In The Missing Pieces, Annie has the Owl Cave ring on when she's at the hospital, or she did before a sneaky nurse stole it from her in a very Lord of the Rings fashion. At that point, she is no longer protected from Bob, so Evil Cooper could have easily come in at that time and impregnated Annie as well. Yes, we've seen Diane a bunch at this point and haven't had a mere mention of Annie, but we've also only had one mention of Linda outside of this scene, so that doesn't matter to me. The next thing the fireman tells Cooper is 2 birds with 1 stone, which is connected to the previous line. If both Richard and Linda are Evil Cooper's children, then it's important that they'll be eliminated as soon as possible for the greater good, which may tie into 430 as well. 430 may be the time when they will be eliminated, or if Linda is the daughter of Annie, then it could be a reference to when Cooper got 2 birds with 1 stone at the hospital. He impregnated 2 women with 1 hospital visit, and if so, then 430 may be the time when he finished it. The last thing the fireman says is, "You are far away." This is in my opinion a nod to us, the audience, since this is the first scene in the show. We are far away from the truth and from figuring out the truth. Also, Cooper, even though the scene is not in chronological order, is far away from the end of his journey in The Return. Time in the lodges doesn't work like it does in the real world. In fact, the concept of time is completely lost when you're in the lodges. That's why time traveling is a thing in Twin Peaks. So the scene in the White Lodge could take place anytime from the fireman's perspective, but for Cooper it takes place after his journey back to Twin Peaks. And that's pretty much all I have to say. For the record, I'd just like to point out that Twin Peaks The Return may be the greatest thing that I have ever seen. I love it so much and I cannot stop thinking about it. We'll see if I'm right in any of my suspicions come Sunday. Please tell me what you think of my insane ideas and please inform me if I'm incorrect at any point. I really want to know if that's the case. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!